What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel where I put out new photography related content almost every Monday. So if you like this video and you want to see more like it, you can go and check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe to get a new video almost every Monday. In today's video, I'm going to talk about 10 ways that I taught myself photography. I am a completely self-taught photographer. I have done no formal schooling and no courses, nothing like that. I've never paid anybody to teach me about photography. So I want to share with you some of the ways that I was able to teach myself and some of the resources that I found incredibly helpful along the way. I do have a numbered list from 1 to 10, and the first two items on this list are fairly obvious, and they are YouTube and Reddit. So number 1, YouTube. There are OG YouTubers that really helped me get an understanding of what photography even is as an art. And those YouTubers are people like Brandon Wolfell and Sean Tucker and Evan Raft and Peter McKinnon and Jessica Kobasi. There's also a bunch of podcasts, and a great photography podcast that I can recommend is the Tony and Chelsea Northrop YouTube channel. They've got a podcast where they just discuss different parts of the industry. B&H Photo also has a great lecture series that is very listenable. You can just like plug it in and have a listen while you're going about your daily life. Obviously there's many different genres of photography YouTube videos, and I find them all helpful in different ways. There's the 30 photography hacks, tips, tricks video type thing, which I found was really helpful for experimenting with the art form and kind of realizing what sorts of things you can do with it beyond just like photo editing. I also really like street photography POVs, especially when you're new to photography. Getting behind the eyes of somebody who's very experienced and very confident in what they are doing can really help kind of guide you when you are out on the street yourself looking for things to photograph. And while YouTube for me has been a great resource in learning photography, it's also been a great resource for learning about kind of peripheral or adjacent subjects like fashion and fashion history, color theory, graphic design, marketing, social media, algorithm stuff, and content creation. So YouTubers I can recommend would be Bliss Foster. He's a fashion critic and he kind of just goes over the history of different labels and brands. There's also Mina Lee, who analyzes sort of contemporary fashion trends through a historical lens. And there's Carolina Zabrowska, who talks about garment construction and historical fashion. If you're a fashion photographer, definitely go and check them out. They will teach you a lot. Number 2 is Reddit. So like YouTube, Reddit has been a phenomenal resource for me in learning photography, mostly because I found that on YouTube, people assert things, they make assertions, whereas on Reddit, you get more discussion. So instead of just one photographer presenting something like it's fact, as you see on YouTube, you get a breadth of photographers' opinions and voices on the topic. I found that it was very helpful reading Reddit posts for developing my own personal style and also just sort of my value system surrounding photography. Subreddits that I've found helpful are r/ask photography, r/wedding photography, r/film photography, street photography, photo critique, and photographs. Notably not r/analog or r/photography, because I've been banned from both of those for what I suspect is misogyny. Number 3, collecting photographs. This, I think, is one of the more important things that you can do as a photographer trying to learn and teach yourself the art. So I use Pinterest for kind of collecting inspiration, and also Instagram. You've got like these saved /collections /guides that you can create with photos that you find on the platform, as well as just physically cutting pictures out of magazines and keeping those in my journal. I have all different kinds of collections of photographs, and I will go back and look at them frequently, especially when I'm feeling like my art is stagnating. The reason I think this is so important is, like, think of it like AI, like how machine learning works. You feed an artificial intelligence program a bunch of different images, like tens of thousands of images of something. And by looking at all of these images of the same thing, that program can then determine which elements are necessary to the definition of that thing and which are superfluous and interchangeable. When you have a collection of photos and all of them appeal to you and kind of hit the same nerve, you can then look at them all as a whole and see which elements in those photos are indispensable for hitting that nerve and which of the elements are kind of don't really matter as much to the impactfulness of that photograph. I hope that makes sense. You know, there's like this famous saying that when you copy one thing, it's plagiarism, but when you copy 100 things, it's art. One of my favorite ways to collect photographs physically is by buying fashion magazines, which brings me to number 4 on my list of 10 things to do, and that is look at fashion magazines. So I personally like to buy them this time of year because you get the double digest, and generally they're exactly the same price as the single digest versions. And look at all that meat that you get for $8. It's mostly ads, but honestly looking at ads in magazines like this is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than looking at the editorial photos, because they're photographs that luxury labels and designers have paid photographers to create. So I read Vogue, Bazaar, and Elle. When I read these, I read them with an X-Acto knife and a glue stick and my journal nearby, and I will cut out pictures that strike me, that have some sort of emotional resonance, and I will put those in my journal, and then I will write about them. Which brings me to number 5, journaling. Now, I have made an entire video about how my art journal helps me with photography. It's quite an old video, so you don't have to check it out if you don't want to, but if you're interested, I would recommend that you do. I have kept an art journal like forever. I always have it on hand, and when I cut images out of magazines, I will paste them into a specific section in my journal and then write detailed notes on what makes each of those photos unique, and also why I think they go together in sort of a category or collection. I write about things like color palette, the lighting used, whether it's shot in studio or on location, and if so, which location they might have used and why they might have chosen that, what dominant themes are in the image and recognizable elements. My journal is also a great place for drawing out photo shoot inspiration and styling options, sketching like layouts and other concepts before a shoot, and then revisiting those pages afterwards to see how the sort of plan that I made compares to the photos that I was able to capture. I also have a whole section dedicated in my journal to collaboration planning and making lists of people to invite, models, makeup artists, photographers, sets, themes, things that I need to get to make this vision a reality. All of that is on paper as well. Which brings me to my next item, which is number 6, collaborating with other photographers. Every time you work alongside another photographer, you have the opportunity to learn from them. Observing how they work can teach you a lot about how you like to work and how you can work. So how do they set up their lighting? What prompts do they give their models? Which styling options did they bring? For street photography sessions, I'm always curious about what sort of details catch other photographers' eyes. How do they frame them? How do they photograph them? How does their style differ from mine? Photographers working together have this opportunity to learn and grow together. Even if you're working with somebody who is below your skill level, there's still a lot you can learn from them in how they operate the camera and what kind of gear they use. I've also learned a lot about lighting just from sneaking peeks at other photographers who are shooting in the same sort of studio space as I am. And honestly, getting to know other photographers personally can really help with gig sharing. So if there's a job that you can't take for whatever reason, it's really professional to be able to say to your client, well, I'm so sorry I'm not available that day, but I can recommend this photographer who specializes in that same genre or whatever, right? And then likewise, those photographers, when they get jobs that they can't take, they will call you. So that said, as important as it is to work with others, there's a lot that you can do on your own, even without a model. And that brings me to point number 7, which is photography prompts. Now, this was a big one for me when I was just starting out with photography, because I don't always have the time to book a model, I don't always have the energy to go and meet somebody, but I do want to keep learning the art and like keep progressing forward. And so I found that setting photography prompts was very helpful for myself. What these are is it's basically just like a word or phrase. Make a list in your journal of these phrases and then try to do one every single day. So for me, it can be something like capture a scene using only shadows, or ask 5 fashionable people for pictures of their outfits on the street. Something, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be good photos, but just getting out there and thinking about photography every single day and having like a goal in mind, like almost like a scavenger hunt, can really help. And it will help change your mind, like shape your thoughts to be kind of more focused on photography in day-to-day life, I find. And this is sort of in the same vein as number 8, which is photographing everything all the time. So when I was first learning photography, and even now honestly, but more so then, I brought my camera absolutely everywhere with me. If I go to a party or a night out or drinks at a bar, or we're hanging out in a friend's backyard or we're going camping, I photographed game nights and dog walks and road trips and protests and concerts and live events and other people's kids and pets and food at restaurants and beverages, every single thing. And that helped me to understand both my own capacity as an artist, my limitations, the limitations of my gear, and how to use my gear in a wide variety of shooting conditions. How fast the shutter speed needs to be to capture somebody in motion, or how high the ISO needs to be to light up a dark room. And so by the time I started booking gigs, I had already photographed many of the same things. I got my first paid gig photographing a party. I had already photographed a dozen social events before that, for free and in much lower stakes situations. I also recommend photographing as many people as possible. So the first 2 years I did 2 or 3 shoots a week, maybe more, and I think I got paid for like 1 a month. Took a lot of pictures for free. It was a lot of like volunteer work, but I got a lot of experience photographing a lot of different kinds of people. But I've said enough about that. Moving on to item number 9 is replicating lighting. And now this one is particularly useful if you are trying to develop a career in fashion and editorial photography. Having a good grasp of artificial lighting and how to create different looks using lighting is invaluable. It's absolutely necessary. So when I was first learning about artificial lighting, and I won't pretend that I'm not still learning, there's so much to learn about artificial lighting. But when I was just first starting out, having my first few days in the studio, I found it really, really helpful to look at photos that I liked online and then try to make an assessment or a judgment about how that photo was created. And a lot of the time that involves going to Reddit, posting a photo and being like, how do you think this photographer took this photo? Or like, what lighting setup do you think this photographer used? And you'll get a whole bunch of opinions and a whole bunch of feedback, and kind of take that, and I would sketch out sort of lighting diagrams for certain looks. And then in studio, I would just replicate them and do my absolute best to make it happen. It wasn't always identical. In fact, frequently it isn't. It's almost like when you go to a restaurant and there's a dish you really, really like, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna get this dish a bunch and try and figure out the recipe so that I can make it at home. That is pretty much exactly what you're doing. You are trying to figure out this recipe just by looking at the final product. The photograph is the dish, and the lighting is the recipe. I don't know if that makes sense, but moving on. Number 10. Number 10 is pretty fun, and it is chatting with employees. If you're an introvert, this might sound terrible, and I understand, I hear you. I usually don't like chatting with employees or anybody when I'm out and about, but when it comes to photography and photography gear, you can learn quite a lot from the people who are selling it to you. Whether this is at a camera store, or like London Drugs, or a camera expo, or even just a garage sale where somebody's selling their old gear, kind of finding out the history of the gear, what it's used for, what other people have said about it. All of these different things can be really, really, really helpful, because I am not a gear person. I will never read gear reviews. I will rarely even watch gear reviews on YouTube. I have no stamina for it. So having conversations with people and getting their honest opinion of like, do you think that this would be good for me? What do you think this price point, blah, 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 has been super, super helpful. But I also find that a lot of the camera store employees and people who sell this gear are photographers themselves, right? And if they're not busy, and if you're not being rude, then usually they're pretty okay to just kind of stand and shoot the breeze and chat with you about photography. And those kind of conversations can be great learning experiences, especially when they have like 20 years in the industry and they're semi-retired and just working at the store to pass the time, which does happen sometimes. I was going to buy Nikon flashes and pocket wizards, and that was how I was going to do the lighting for outdoor shoots. And I went to London Drugs, and thank God there was a guy there who had been a photographer for years and was like, don't do this to yourself, just buy Godox. And he convinced me to buy Godox, and oh my God, what a good decision. They worked so much better, and that's something that I would never have thought of or even known about if I hadn't made the time to talk to an employee. Anyway, that's the whole video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know that was a lot of me talking, but I had fun making this video. And if you follow all these tips, maybe one day you too will be able to say that you are a completely self-taught professional photographer. So if you enjoyed this video, you can leave a like, you can leave a comment, you can subscribe, turn that notification bell icon on, and stay tuned for next week when I will be coming out with another photography-related video. And in the meantime, stay sharp and don't forget to keep shooting. Bye, guys.